If I asked you to describe your financial situation, could you accurately tell me where you are, what you have? Would you even be willing to? No matter what your situation is, I promise you, I've heard worse. I'm Sara McCullough, certified financial planner and certified divorce financial analyst, and I'm sharing some of the stories I've experienced over my career, taking those lessons and turning them into actionable steps for you to use. This is I've Heard Worse. Endings are hard and uncomfortable. Some endings get more judgment than others. That's not helpful. Nobody likes to think about endings or worst case scenarios or hard changes, but avoiding them doesn't make them any less real. And here's the thing. In this life, all relationships end. They end through death, or they can end through divorce for our intimate relationships. Should you plan for these endings? Well, with death, either you plan for it, or the provincial government has a plan for you. Should you plan for divorce? Because it might not happen to you. And planning for it doesn't sound quite right. And I agree. What I do think would be helpful, because financial pressure, financial differences, is still one of the top reasons for divorce. I think if you are having financial discussions in the relationship, sharing financial decision-making in the relationship, it can take some pressure off the relationship. And maybe you can avoid getting to the point where divorce is the right answer for you. And if you do end up in a divorce situation, if you are already familiar with your finances, if you're already comfortable with the numbers, if you already have some information, then you can work it into what your new context might look like. That can reduce the stress and reduce the emotional decision-making that will happen in that moment. So this episode is going to look at the financial effects of death and divorce, the emotional toll that they can take, and how proactive planning can provide peace of mind and give you better decision-making capabilities. I got an email about 1.5 years ago, and it was from somebody who had had a liver cancer diagnosis. And it was a rare diagnosis in that this cancer usually isn't caught until stage 4. So this was a shadow on a scan that had been done for something else entirely. The first surgery went well. Person was being monitored. And then another shadow showed up. And in this email listing off what was going to happen next, this person ended the email with the sentence, "Who plans for this?" And I had to read that sentence about 5 times because I thought, well, who plans for this? We do. We do. This was actually another advice-only planner that I had done some work with over the last number of years. And I thought, how can you write that sentence? We plan for this. This is what we do. It's literally our jobs. And when I was having coffee with her a couple of months later, I asked her about that sentence. I said, "Did you realize you wrote that?" And she said, "I did." What I meant was I was financially prepared. I wasn't emotionally prepared for how hard it would be to make decisions about my treatment and about what I wanted and how I wanted to be cared for. She said, I wasn't prepared for the emotion, but financially I was prepared. And it would have been a lot harder if she hadn't been financially prepared. Being financially prepared left her able to take that energy that otherwise would have gone towards financial stress or financial uncertainty, take that energy and use it to all of the decisions that she needed to make. We often walk around thinking that if we don't talk about these things, that maybe they won't happen. We know that's not true, but that's how we behave. And every day that you wake up alive, you didn't need a will, you didn't need life insurance, I was wrong, I get it. I totally get it. But there will be a day that you don't wake up alive. And we don't know what day that is. I used to say to clients, if you died. And what I meant was, if you died unexpectedly, if you died sooner than we statistically think you're going to die. But I really have changed that sentence. I say to clients now, when you die. And one of my clients said in a meeting when we were talking about life insurance, she asked me a question, and I answered her, and she said, could you be any more blunt? And I said, well, that's the answer. That's the reality. If you cancel the life insurance, you won't get the payout. You'll save $200 on the premium, but you'll miss out on $300,000 if he dies. If you're okay with that, go for it. But if you want the payout and he dies, you need to keep the insurance. So these are hard things. They're hard things to think about ourselves not being here, not being with our loved ones, not being with family and friends. But not thinking about them and not planning for them doesn't mean that they won't happen. It does mean that they will happen in a way that we might not want, because they will happen. Financial things will happen after your death and during and after a divorce. So I wanted to give you just a couple of really quick stories about what can planning do, not just for you, but others around you. I often work with multiple generations in a family. And when I was meeting with adult children, one of them said to me, I'm so glad you're working with our mom, because now I know that her affairs are going to be in order. Like, I really trust that she knows how much she can spend, that she knows what her estate's going to look like, that everything's just going to be organized now, that she's planning with you. And you could tell that that brought so much relief to them as well. Mom was also relieved. When I had my appointments with Mom, she was relieved. But to see it trickle down like that was really interesting to me. And for another client, they had put a lot of work into working with a lawyer for their wills. This was parents for adult children. They had done a lot of work because one of their adult children had special needs. So they wanted their estate to be shared by all of their children, but the one child did have particular needs as far as a pool of income, as far as housing. There were just a lot of things that meant that that part of the plan was different than the other three children. And so all of their things were arranged, the documents were drawn up, they were signed, everything was great. But after about 8 years, the situation had changed enough, including financially, that when I read over that client's will again, it didn't work anymore. It didn't meet the goals. Dad had passed away, so it was just Mom left. And their expenses in the previous 6 years had been a lot higher than they had been anticipating for various reasons. They had just been higher, and the things that would have been left in Mom's estate, the way the will was written, the 3 adult children that didn't have needs would have inherited first, and the remainder was to be left for the child with special needs. And 8 years ago, there would have been a lot of money left in that remainder account. But now, actually, there wouldn't have been anything left. So Mom needed to go back and update her will. She needed to change her instructions because the situation had changed. So that's the importance of not just planning once and checking it off a list like it's done, but also revisiting it. When we think about death, what did I say? What do I have now? What's my situation now? What would happen if those instructions were acted on? Is that the outcome I want? That's what we're talking about when we talk about estate planning and will planning. We're talking about, what do you want to happen with usually your financial assets? That's often a big piece for most of us. And if we just think about that, all of the things that you worked so hard to build, and you want to benefit your loved ones, do the instructions that you have direct them to where you want things to go in amounts that are appropriate. So let's talk about the gaps that can happen. We've talked just a little bit about having an up-to-date will. We've talked about when to go back and update, because what can happen if we don't? Things don't go as intended. So let's just take a look at a few examples. And this can be anything from outdated will instructions, not having a will, outdated insurance, wrong beneficiaries, unclear financial records. So if we just start there with unclear financial records. In Canada, there are websites. There's one for abandoned bank accounts, and there's one for unclaimed insurance policies. And this is money that, based on the date of birth of the owner of the account or the policy, these institutions know this person isn't alive anymore, but nobody ever came to collect it. And these were policies that were paid up. Had somebody notified the insurance company, they would have paid out. They would have sent a check. But nobody knew. The executor couldn't find it. The kids didn't know. There was no record. Nobody knew where to look. So that's the first reason that you do planning. Because when we plan, it involves some level of organization, getting all of your stuff in one spot, telling somebody where it is, what do you have. So that's important. We don't want to inadvertently lose things that we meant to go to people that we care about. Let's talk about what if we don't have a will. 50% of Canadians don't have any will at all. As we just discussed, the other 50% are, as I usually say, varying degrees of outdated. And often the response I hear from people who don't have a will, we often think if we're in a relationship, that's okay, my spouse will get everything. No, possibly not. When I said earlier, if you don't make a plan, the provincial government has one for you. In Ontario, your spouse will not get everything that's in your estate. Your spouse will get the first $300,000 of your estate. And beyond that, if you have a spouse and children, your spouse will divide that amount with your children. That's not usually what we want, but that is the government's plan for you if you do not have a will. And when I say your children, I mean all of your children, your babies. Your babies will inherit. It will have to be held in trust until they are 18, and your spouse may or may not be able to control that trust. That's not what most of us want, but that's what we're choosing when we don't write a will. What if you're not married, but you're in a common law relationship and you don't have a will? Again, this can vary by province. Every province gets to set the rules. But in Ontario, common law spouses don't have property rights. And what that means is if you pass away without a will and you don't jointly own an asset with your common law partner, they will not inherit it. There is no mechanism to get it to them. The government rules say that it will go to your closest blood relatives. So that means your parents, then your siblings, then your aunts and uncles, then your cousins. Province just works out the tree there. So not your partner, that's for sure, but your closest blood family. When we've been in a relationship for years, that's often not what we want. That's not what we intend. But when we don't plan, when we pass away, that is what will happen, unless your partner takes your estate to court. And even then, common law property rights are different than married. So day to day, legally married in common law doesn't look different anymore. But legally on divorce and death, it can be very, very different. So unless we write down what we want, your survivors are going to be left using the government plan. The other thing that often happens without advice is that people want to save tax. So this usually happens after the first parent passes away. So we've got a parent, we've got adult children, and that parent does not want to pay tax. I don't want to pay any more tax than I have to. And so they put their adult children joint on their assets because they're going to save tax. Well, maybe. The tax that they're worried about and that they're talking about is the estate administration tax, more commonly known as probate tax. And so this is a tax. When you pass away, your will goes to court. The court stamps it saying, yes, I agree, this is the last will. Go ahead and divide the stuff as listed. And they collect a tax for that. Again, varies by province. In Ontario, estate administration tax on average is 1.5%. So your parent, if they put an adult child joint on title for their home that they live in, they have successfully avoided the 1.5% tax. That is true. What they've done, though, is they have gifted CRA, capital gains tax, on the part of the house that their adult child owns, if that child owns another house, because only one principal residence is free of capital gains tax. So if that parent really wanted to save tax, they would have left it in their own name. They would have paid the estate administration tax, proceeds, absolutely free of tax. Everybody carries on. Kids divide the proceeds. By putting a child joint on title when that child owns a house, half of those proceeds are going to be exposed to some level of tax on the gain in price from the time the child went on title to the time the parent passed away, if they own their own home. So you successfully avoided 1.5%, and you added in 50% of the gains at the child's top tax rate. That's not probably what we intended, but that's exactly what happened. So again, you need to plan well, and you need to plan with enough information, and you need to plan understanding your current context. There are a lot of other issues, in my opinion, about putting adult children joint on title. I rarely recommend it for so many other reasons that we're not going to get into today. But can you see how, in an effort to save a tax that we don't fully understand, most people are surprised when I say probate is 1.5%. They say, no, no, no. I saw my sister-in-law settle her parents' estate and it was, tax bills were huge. That's CRA. That's different. That was related to their final tax return, not related to probate. So we get confused. We have partial information and we go and act on it. So that is a common misconception about what will solve needing a will. I don't need a will because my child is joint on it, and I'm going to save tax. You still need a will. There are issues with your child being joint, and you very possibly haven't saved any tax at all. You might have even increased it. Let's talk briefly about what happens if you have a corporation. If you started your own business and you incorporated it. If you did, hooray, that's exciting. But if you now don't plan for that corporation, it might be stranded on your death. Corporations are separate legal entities from you. And I know that you know this because that's probably a lot of the reason that you incorporated in the first place. It's separate from you. The liability is over there, not with you. You know it's a separate legal entity. But what that means is the corporation doesn't die when you die. It's separate. It's still there. It just might not have any shareholders at all. So if we don't plan for these things that we have done, these things that we built and grew and successfully executed on, we might leave them stranded. We might leave them without an owner, without an ability to control, not as an inheritance to our family and loved ones, but stranded. So failing to plan can cause not only financial hardship that didn't need to be there, but also emotional hardship. So without the right plans in place, these events might not just drain bank accounts. If there's confusion, if there's more tax than intended, if there's a dispute among your beneficiaries about what you meant, they can impact your loved one's well-being and peace of mind. And so it's important to be able to Take the time that you need. We've talked about planning before a death. It's also important post-death, post-divorce, to take the time that you need before making big financial decisions. This is really important, and I don't want you to underestimate how difficult this can be. Think back again to that email that I got. She had been a financial planner for decades. And her email to me said, "Who plans for this? I didn't know." She had talked to hundreds of clients about this. I'm sure she had lost clients in her career. She had been close to it. She had been next to it. But she didn't fully understand until it happened to her how big the emotional toll was. So don't underestimate that, and go slow with your financial decisions that you need to make after those events occur. So I hope you can see the value of planning in being at least financially prepared for these events, and how that financial preparedness can reduce the emotional toll that happens when a death or a divorce happens. So if we think about how do we do this, what are the steps we need to take? When we think about death, creating a will is important. This is the instructions that your executor will follow for your financial assets once you are gone. It also covers other areas, but today we're just going to stick to financial assets. It can do a lot of other things. I recommend you speak to an estate lawyer and get your will drafted if you do not have one. So you need a will. This is your wishes. What do you want to happen to your stuff? You need to maintain an updated list of assets. What do you own? What do you owe? We talked about that in a previous episode. Go back and listen to it if you are at the beginning of getting this information together. Get it together, and then you can take that to the conversation with your lawyer. You also need to make sure, if life insurance is applicable in your situation, that you have enough coverage, that you have the correct beneficiaries on that coverage, and that you stay on top of, when does the coverage expire? How much do I have now? So that's another important piece of your finances that is really meant to stand in for you financially if you can't be here for your family and your loved ones. When we think about divorce, again, you're not planning directly for divorce. That's not what we're talking about here. What we are talking about is keeping accurate financial records, because that takes so much pressure off in other areas in your day-to-day life. But it also lets you know, where are we right now? If there happens to be a day where you need to take it apart, if you are already familiar with where you are financially, it just takes off some of the work that you have to do in that moment. Because in a divorce, you will make big financial decisions that are not reversible. So, keeping financial records, keeping them organized, understanding what assets are shared and what ones might be separate. And consider marriage contracts. I talk to a lot of clients about these, and there's good reasons for them. And even if you don't choose to go ahead with one, I believe when you are going into a relationship that you should at least discuss one and understand the pros and cons of these types of agreements, and then understand whether you want to move forward with one or not. The choice is ultimately up to you, but I believe you need enough information to make a confident decision. I'm going to try to tell you a story about one of my clients who had to use the planning that we did. I have not told this story out loud to anyone yet. I was doing some business transition planning for a family, and there's always a lot of personalities involved in those. So parents were ready to retire or slow down a little bit. And there were several kids working in the business. And so we had to divide up who got what was there, how do we have the kids take over? Because there was a time where these adult children didn't have anything in their own names and they weren't directly making decisions. And actually, very early in the planning process, one of the family members was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And it wasn't one of the parents, it was one of the kids. And it would have been really easy for this family to stop planning. Because planning a business transition, if anybody's ever done it, been a part of it, been a part of a family business, these are hard, messy conversations. So on a regular day, it's hard. And this wasn't a regular day for this family. And they did it. They did it. We kept planning and they got everything done. And then this child did pass away. And at the visitation, one of the family members came to me and she said, I need to tell you something. And I could tell by her voice it was a big something. And I'm thinking, I don't even know what this is. And she said, I need you to know, the four of us talked last week before the death. And I know from that conversation that he felt so much better about letting go because the planning was done, because he knew where his wife and kids were going to be, because we had finished what was intended. The documents were signed, the control had passed from the parents to the kids, everything was done. And she said, I know that gave him so much peace. And that was a huge thing for me to hear. I don't want my clients to use the planning that fast when they're that age, but that was the reality. There was no way around that. If there was any way around it, believe me, this couple would have found it and they would have taken it. But there wasn't. So the best we could do was do the planning that needed to be done so that he could let go, knowing where his family would be financially, so that there was no family fighting after the death, because that was the other very real potential. Because some of the kids are in the business, some are not. So had the planning not been clear, I think there would have been a fight. And so that is the power of planning. So I want you to think about your own level of preparedness. And I want you to take the first step toward a solution if you feel like, I really am not as prepared as I want to be. And you can go back to the episode that talks about net worth. We'll put a link in the show notes to that, because that's where you're going to start. And you're going to take that net worth statement that you do, you're going to take that into the lawyer when you talk to them about a will. Because not having a plan doesn't mean that it won't happen. It means that when it happens, you're going to get somebody else's plan for your family. Any step that you can take now reduces the stress and uncertainty in the future, and it makes sure that in the case of death, your family is going to be more financially stable and is going to be able to make more confident decisions when you can no longer be there. And for divorce, being organized, understanding your situation in the relationship means that you will be able to make more confident decisions if that relationship ends. Thank you for listening. Make sure to check out the other episodes. There are 12 in this series, each one focusing on a different important aspect of financial planning. You can listen from start to finish, or pick and choose the episodes that matter most to you. Consider sharing an episode with someone else who needs to hear it. Thank you for liking and subscribing. And remember, no matter what you think of your financial situation, I've heard worse, which means you and I can make it better.